Thank you everyone for joining us today. You have tuned into or are sitting in the audience for the Aspen City Council work session of August 25th. Had that great rain this morning, and we're onto a beautiful sunny afternoon. So the item today that we're going to be talking about are our water rates issues, which are pressing, and short-term rental codes. So I'm just going to turn it over to our staff to begin to present. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. For the record, I'm Emmy Oliver. I'm the Lodging and Commercial Core Program Manager, and I'm joined here by Haley Hart, Senior Long Range Planner, and Ben Anderson, Community Development Director. Thanks for having us. Permission to share my screen?
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay. We are here this afternoon to talk about short-term rentals within the residential multifamily zone district. Back in February of this year, Council directed us to move forward with code amendments for several STR topics and to bring more information about this specific topic to frame a discussion about potential policy changes. So in June, Council adopted Policy Resolution 77, which proposed code amendments for topics 1 through 6 on the screen. The policy resolution also included broad language about the cap policy in RMF. However, at this time, staff have proposed no changes to the current policy. What we're hoping to get out of this conversation tonight is whether you'd like for staff to pursue changes to STR policy in the RMF zone district. Our agenda includes information about the RMF zone and about how Aspen is using caps to regulate short-term rentals. We'll look at waitlist and attrition data, and then we'll walk through some potential paths forward based on the information that we have. At the end, we'll share our staff recommendation, and we'll look at the anticipated timeline for the whole package of code amendments. So jumping right in, this slide is showing a GIS map of the RMF zone district. The key takeaway is that this zone is located in many different pockets throughout town, and on the map, those pockets are highlighted in teal. RMF is actually so spread out that we couldn't fit the entirety of it on the screen and still keep it legible. We're actually missing some sections out near Burlingame and the ABC, which mainly contain deed-restricted units. But for our discussion tonight, the segments of RMF you see on the screen are what we're going to be focused on. As its name implies, the residential multifamily zone district is primarily residential, and it contains a fair number of multifamily developments. One of the reasons RMF is so spread out is because as multifamily buildings were developed, the general areas around the developments were zoned to prevent future changes in density. This is one of our only zone districts where multifamily buildings are incentivized and protected. Title 26 states that the intent for the RMF zone is to provide for the use of land for intensive long-term residential purposes, short-term rentals, and customary accessory uses. Like many other zones, RMF is intended first for long-term rentals and second for short-term rentals. What makes it stand out among the other zones is that it encourages high density, and it has quite a few multifamily buildings that have been used as short-term rentals for many years. In fact, RMF actually has over 50% more short-term rental permits than any other residential zone right now. And having lots of multifamily developments means that there's a concentration of smaller units in RMF as well. And at current, almost 60% of STRs in RMF have 2 bedrooms or less. You saw this map in your memo, but if I can stop clicking on it. I just wanted to highlight again that these 3 circled pockets of RMF are where all the waitlisted properties are located. Over 80% of them are to the east of downtown, as indicated by the larger circle on the right of the screen. And even though waitlist properties are certainly spread out across town, it's difficult to treat these locations separately from one another because they are all part of the same zone district, which intends for the same purposes: long-term residential, short-term rentals, and accessory uses. So to give you a little bit more context, here is a snapshot of some current program totals. In the middle column, you see numbers for the entire city, and in the right-hand column, you can see numbers for within the RMF zone only. Almost all the permits issued right now in RMF are classic permits, and those are for non-owner occupied units, and only 12% of permits are issued to primary residents in the RMF zone. It's important to note that out of about 6,400 residential units in Aspen, about 2,800 of those are deed restricted, and they're not included in the free market total here since they're ineligible for use as short-term rentals. So all told, we're sitting at just over 13% of free market units being used as short-term rentals in RMF. And when we look at all STR permits citywide, we're currently using about 31% of free market units as short-term rentals.
Of the total residential units in Aspen, minus deed restricted, is 31% of our housing inventory.
Correct.
Thank you.
Well, that means they have a permit.
Yes.
Permit. Yes.
It's different than
Yeah.
being actively used.
And I would also say, just to give a little bit of additional clarity to that 31% number, that includes where, the zone districts where we don't have caps and where we sort of grant lodge exempt.
Right.
Or lodge exempt permits related to the condo hotels.
Okay. So if we took out the condo hotels as being traditional lodging, it would be a smaller percentage of all the residential units in town. Thank you for clarifying that.
So when it comes to caps, we know from researching other caste communities that caps are the most used tool to dictate location and concentration of short-term rentals in a community. Caps were central to the pursuit of STR policy in 2022. And whether or not that sentiment remains now, at the time these regulations were developed, caps were a very essential element of the program that received immense support from the community. Caps ensure that STRs are concentrated in zones near transit options and businesses that visitors rely on. Caps support the lodging bed base by allowing a fixed number of STRs as alternatives to hotels within our neighborhoods. They help curb the perceived impacts of short-term rentals in neighborhoods like parking, noise, turnover of visitors and service providers. And maybe most importantly, caps help balance the interests of residents and STR operators by putting guardrails around a use that might otherwise expand without limits. Ultimately, caps provide assurance that local neighborhoods can retain residential character while also allowing opportunities to generate STR income. The caps that we have today, which are in RMF and 13 other zone districts, were set based on the STR activity that was occurring in 2022. As a response to public feedback, Council reviewed the number of STRs in each zone district and decided on a 25% reduction of that existing activity in 2022. That reduction meant that they set caps at 75% of the existing number of STRs. In RMF, where there were 254 permits, the cap was set to 190 permits. This same method of setting caps was used for all 14 capped residential zones throughout Aspen. The caps were thought to strike a balance between continuing to allow STRs in residential areas. Oops, I went too soon, to strike a balance between continuing to allow STRs and creating greater definition to the number and the location of the units. They were also meant to make more residential units available for optional long-term rental activity. They were supported by a great deal of public input, and they were unanimously approved by the council in 2022. All right. Moving now to the subject of attrition. I think it's safe to say that the perceived issue that we're attempting to respond to in RMF really consists of two parts. The first is that we've needed to rely on attrition of permits from the start of the program. The second, which we'll get to in a moment, is that we have a wait list for permits in RMF, which has been growing since 2022. You can see two lines on the graph. The slanted green line represents the attrition of permits from 2022 until now, and the flat red line represents the cap of 190 permits. On average, 20 permits per year have been abandoned in RMF since 2022. We typically find that around 70% of abandonments occur during the annual renewal period, when operators do not renew permits for the following year. Abandonments also occur throughout the year as properties are either sold or the owners decide to stop renting and they take the time to notify the city of such. Over 60 permits have been abandoned in RMF in the last 3 years. And once one more permit is abandoned, we will arrive at the 190 permit cap. That's when the two lines in the graph will meet. When 2 more permits are abandoned, the city will be able to offer a permit to the first applicant on the RMF waitlist. And though we can't say this with, exact certainty, if the trends from the last 3 renewal periods continue and are any indication of what might happen at the end of this year, we are very likely to have permits available in the first quarter of 2026. Afterward, as more permits become abandoned in RMF, the city will extend more permit offers to those on the wait list. So I just want to highlight that we are almost exactly where we are intended to be with attrition of permits in RMF. Once we reach the cap, it will be a one out, one in situation that will begin to reflect as a constant 190 permit total in RMF and periodic movement of applications up the wait list.
Emmy, 2 quick questions. One is, there's no further step downs intended at this point in the permit cap numbers, right? It was just one step, the 25% reduction. We're not phasing it in, or?
There was nothing built in.
190 is intended
Yes.
permit. Okay, great. And the second question is, have we non-renewed, have we involuntarily non-renewed anybody?
For violations of
Violations
their code.
or non-use. That's one of the things I pointed out earlier, is that those figures are based on having a permit. But for example, when this all started, I got a permit. I've never short-term rented my house, but I got it because I didn't know what was going to come out of this whole system. So I said, may as well get it. But I don't know if we've sort of told people they can't renew it because they didn't do that mandatory one rental per year, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have not voluntarily non-renewed anyone for violations to this point.
And are we checking that mandatory rental requirement? And so do we know how many people are not meeting that?
Yes, we began enforcing that requirement last year. So this year will be the second year that we will be checking tax remittance to make sure that they can renew for the following year.
But despite checking for last year, you didn't tell anyone, even if there were people who did not rent, you didn't tell them they couldn't renew?
There was no one that did not submit tax, STR taxes last year.
In RMF or throughout the whole program?
Throughout.
That's surprising. Okay, thanks.
Sure. Okay, the second component to this issue, again, is that we have a waiting list for permits in RMF. When we resumed permitting at the end of the moratorium, because we already had more permits than were allowed by the cap, we had to add every application in RMF straight onto the wait list. So within those first few months of the program, we added 20 applicants to the wait list. You can see that sharp curve at the start of the line. Those 20 applicants make up 37% of the entire wait list. And the wait list has been growing ever since. We see approximately 1 application per month added to the wait list. That's our average. In terms of the location of these waitlisted properties, we learned earlier that they're all in those 3 pockets of RMF throughout town. 83% of them are in the area east of Original Street and west of the Roaring Fork. And the remaining 17% of properties are spread between the S-Curves area and the small pocket of RMF near Coke Park and the Ice Garden.
I seem to recall somewhere reading the memo, it was mentioned that there was a lot of new ownership since 2022 when the codes went into effect, and a lot of that new ownership is now waitlisted. So they were kind of buying the property knowing what the rules were, but hoping for change, perhaps.
One could assume that 33% of the properties on the wait list were transacted after the regulations went into effect.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's a good segue, Rachel, because that was my next point. That's 1/3 of the properties on the wait list that assumed new ownership and applied for short-term rental permits after the caps were adopted and the wait lists were already in effect. Additionally, all properties on the wait list are eligible to rent on a long-term basis for 30 days or more at a time. And we know that over 20% of properties are currently licensed for either long-term or short-term rentals where the property is the primary residence of the owner.
Is that 22% of the 54 applicants on the wait list?
Yes,
Okay. Are renting long-term? Thank you.
yes. Or they have the owner-occupied short-term.
Or they have the owner occupied?
We have 6 with long-term rental licenses and 6 with the owner-occupied short-term rental licenses.
Thank you.
In summary, we have a substantial group of waitlisted applicants, the vast majority of which are in the eastern portion of RMF, and 1/3 of which have changed ownerships since the caps became effective. It's also important to point out that we're losing an average of 20 permits per year, and we're adding an average of 12 permits per year to the wait list. So up to now, the attrition of permits is happening faster than the expansion of the wait lists. All right. So with all that said, staff can conceive of a few courses of action moving forward. The first would be to retain the existing policy, keep the cap as it is currently, and make no changes to the wait list. The second option would be to issue permits to any number of the wait list applicants and adjust the cap to account for those additional permits that we issue. A third option would be to eliminate the cap in RMF and issue permits to everyone on the wait list and all who qualify in the future. There is a fourth option here, which I mentioned since it was brought up in past meetings. It involves the consideration of rezoning RMF or of changing zone overlays within RMF. As was stated in your memo for tonight, staff strongly recommends against this option. Before we move forward, I want to be clear that we have not included this topic in our menu of further considerations for council. So if there is a majority of the council that would like to discuss this particular zoning option further, staff would encourage that conversation to happen now before we move into the details for options 1 through 3.
Anyone? Bill?
Happy to go first. Thank you for the great presentation and memo. I appreciate it, and team. I personally don't have a fundamental issue with the wait list, and I think that the data that you've presented shows that at least so far things are trending in the right direction on the wait list. What I do have an issue with is this fundamental unfairness in units that were purpose-built to be short-term rentals that are being treated so differently than those a couple of blocks away. And, just by way of examples, although there are many, if you're in Chateau Eau Claire or Chateau Roaring Fork, you're being treated very differently than if you're in Chateau Dumont or Chaumont. They were built for the same purpose, by the same developer, to very similar buyers. And they had certain expectations, and they're being treated very differently now. And that's what I'm struggling with. I don't really mind that there's a wait list. I don't want a different cap number. I don't want to eliminate the caps. I don't want to clear the wait list. None of those things do it for me. But for somebody who has owned, who suddenly decides they want to rent, has owned for a long time in one of these buildings, decides they want or need to rent because of their financial situation, or somebody who's buying into that for that matter, these are the same product and they're being treated totally differently. That's what I'm really struggling with. And I can respect why number 4 is difficult for you, but 1 through 3 make no sense to me because I don't have an issue with those things. I just have an issue with the way that these things are being treated. So that 4 is the only thing that I have to lean towards. I don't know that we need to totally rip open the zoning code and change this. Maybe there's some kind of overlays that we can do, or spot zoning that's specific to short-term rentals, so that that doesn't affect any of the other zoning rules. It's just regarding short-term rentals, and hopefully that would be a lighter lift. But I just can't get over the fact that we're really treating fundamentally identical property in a very different way.
Yeah. A couple of comments to that, because I think it's a valid point for sure. I think when this was set up, and I think consistent with other CAS communities that we looked at, I think using zone districts as the mechanism for dividing up town and making decisions about where concentrations were more appropriate than other. It was the zone district structure that I think other communities have used and we used as well. I will say from staff's perspective, just kind of looking at these properties and thinking about the concept of a spot zoning, or trying to look at what one property is versus another property. All of these are condominiumized units. Without a doubt, many of them were developed as vacation focused properties. But we've also got patterns of fairly significant local usage over time. And it's within the same building, it's a total mix. And so I think, there's some other, beyond the that bright line between the lodge zone district and the kind of commercial core that we sort of exempted numbers. It's a pretty bright demarcation between those lines and what's happening on the other side of that line in the RMF. And there's no doubt that they're blocks away from each other. But I do think that as I recollected sort of the conversation around this with the community, I recall that there was sentiment, I think that's what it was, about two things. One, we all in the community acknowledged that the core in these commercial areas in town, the Lodge Zone District, was a central focus of these places, and that as you move into these RMFs, that there was an increasing residential quality to them. Entirely residential long-term, no, but an increasing residential quality, and that one, there was a desire to kind of protect that. So I would say that. And then I would also just say, in response to, some of the comments that we've received from individual properties and their property managers, a long time ago, we created this lodge preservation overlay that captured some properties that in their past at some point had been a lodge, functioned as a lodge, probably a condo hotel of some sort, but functioned as a lodge, had a front desk and all that kind of stuff. And whether or not we could use that and extend that sort of overlay to sort of other properties. That particular overlay was really utilized to capture the fact that those former lodge properties were sitting as non-conforming uses in R6 and some other zone districts that didn't allow some sort of multifamily in them. And so that was really the intention of that, was to give them future development or redevelopment certainty as they moved forward. So again, kind of created for a different purpose. So I don't think we have necessarily, if that's the desire of trying to differentiate from one property to the next, some additional policy or regulation that sort of carve those off. I will just say from staff's perspective, differentiating those properties that on the face of it look identical to each other, that are next door to each other, that might be more balanced residential rather than short-term, or vice versa. They all look the same. They might be located next to each other. And again, I think the differentiation between those kinds of properties is kind of a hard thing to land on. So I guess number 4, from staff's perspective, using our existing zone or existing zone overlays, we're very strongly against that, or recommending against that. If there is some other consideration around this topic that sort of gets at what you're trying to get at, we can contemplate that. It's just using the stuff that we currently have in the code would create lots of, I think, unintended complexity to things.
Yeah, I get that, and that's exactly why I brought this up the first time, is right, like, I live in RMF, as you know. My RMF neighborhood is very different from the East Side RMF neighborhood.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't welcome a ton of STR, uncapped RMF, uncapped STRs in my RMF neighborhood. I agree with everything you said, Ben. The one thing I would say I don't agree with is that it's that difficult to differentiate from property to property. And again, I'll use specific examples to illustrate my point, but there's lots of ways to exemplify this. But, the Villager on Cooper is very different from Chateau Roaring Fork right next to it. Those were built for very different purposes. Those are very different style units. They're both in the same zone district. I don't think it's that hard to discriminate between those two. I know there will be contention. I'm not blind to that, but I think that we can come up with like a reasonable set of criteria. And I think the lodge preservation overlay is a good example of like how it's a different thing, that, you're not changing the zone districts themselves. You're doing something that pertains just to the STR use and rules. And so that's what I would encourage everyone to consider. I think that there's sort of an in-between way to do this that is very targeted and surgical pertaining to the STR uses, that just brings some equity to what these properties were built for.
Anyone else care to comment on that topic that Bill has? Okay, but not on that number 4?
Not
per se. Yeah. For me, I don't really want to consider changes with number 4. And I appreciate what you're saying, and you respect what you're saying, Bill, but I see a few different factors that maybe weigh in for me. One, if, within that zone district, a certain number of those people are owner occupied and able to receive a permit no matter what because they live there. And others are renting long-term, which was kind of beyond pure residential. Long-term rental was the next priority. I don't want to change it so that it all will become STRs, that the people renting long-term and living there themselves or whatever. And that particularly concerns me when we look at the change in ownership that's happened since the code went into effect. And you have 33% of the people on the wait list are saying, just change the code and I can cash in. And that they bought a property that wasn't going to be automatically let into that program unless they live there full time or live there half a year, or, and they can still have the economic value of renting long term. I do think that the issues, neighborhood concerns in a condominiumized mixed-use type of building or mixed, between rental and residential is already challenging. I've heard from many residents about, I used to leave the bike outside my door, rather than bring it in the unit, and now I don't know if I can do that. I used to do this, and I don't know if I can do that. The people here, I understand, they just came in for a weekend vacation, but I can't listen to the stereo at 2 o'clock in the morning and still go to work the next day. And so, the fact that they are already somewhat mixed use between long-term rental residents and some short-term, it's already kind of a lot in those buildings. And so I just don't see really trying to change the boundary of the code. And I had thought a lot about that. Should it just be simpler to just pull this one building into the lodging district or something like that? But I think you then start a domino effect of, but wait a second, I just bought a unit in a building only 500 yards from here, only 500 feet from here. Now, why don't we change the code for this area too? And so those are the reasons why I would stick with what we have here.
So can I offer?
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Some retort for thought? I fully appreciate all those concerns about the mixed nature of short-term rentals, but we have a framework that allows short-term rentals, and we've permitted it in very similar buildings. Again, Chateau Chalmont and Dumont are two good examples. There are a lot of people that live there full-time that are contending with this. So why are we allowing it there, and we're not allowing, and we're having different rules a couple of blocks away in a building built for the exact same purpose at essentially the same time? That's what I'm struggling with. It's to me, it's either like we should get rid of short-term rentals totally and allow for some more development of hotels and keep all the vacationers together and just disallow short-term rentals, or we should allow places that were built to be short-term rentals to continue to be short-term rentals.
Yeah.
That's where I struggle, is like treating two people totally differently for not a great reason. The zone districts were there, I get it, but nobody contemplated using those zone districts as short-term rental boundaries prior. That was a new use for something that was never contemplated for that.
Yeah, I can understand that. And for me, unfortunately, almost any issue, there's always a line, and someone's always on the other side of that line, whether it's setting rates or, permit accounts or things like that. The challenge that I see is that you are able, to have long-term rentals for an income opportunity. And I think literally when these codes were written associated with the various zone districts, short-term rentals was not what short-term rentals is now. There wasn't the Airbnb, there wasn't all the websites. I don't even know, I think we almost meant more short-term rentals were like a week or less, or anything less than 30 days. But I don't know that the short-term the terminology short-term meant 20 different couples for 2 nights each in a month, or 15. It didn't mean the same thing that we're starting to look at as short-term rentals now on prime weekends. But again, it's just a difference of opinion on that. Again, anyone else wants to weigh in on that, or we'll go on to the next topics that they have. Go ahead.
Thank you. For option 1, we're proposing to make no immediate changes to our policy and allow the attrition and wait lists to continue functioning as they currently are and were intended to. We'd keep the 190 permit cap in RMF and keep the wait list the same. Again, staff does find a high probability that at least some permits will become available in RMF in the first quarter of 2026 if the recent trends continue into next year. A benefit to this option is that we don't require a change in policy. We can uphold the regulations as they were created just 3 years ago and let them continue working. We maintain the policy outcomes intended by Ordinance 9. The downside to this approach is that the current circumstance for waitlists will remain. This is something staff and council are likely to continue to hear about from waitlisted applicants. And applicants toward the end of the waitlist may have several more years of waiting for a permit.
Okay.
We're showing options 2 and 3 together because they both involve changing the number of permits allowed in RMF, and they have essentially the same pros and cons. Option 2 involves issuing permits to the entire waitlist or a portion of the waitlist as determined by council. Because we are so close to achieving the cap number naturally, it would be prudent to increase the cap to account for any permits we'd issue with this option so that we don't find ourselves in a similar situation as we are currently, where we need to abandon a certain number of permits before we can get back down to the cap and onto the wait list. The third option involves removing the cap in RMF entirely. This would mean all waitlist applicants would be offered permits and no waitlist would exist in RMF moving forward. The pros for either option 2 or 3 would be eliminating or reducing the wait times for applicants, as well as the potential to bring in additional tax revenue, both from increased visitation and the STR taxes themselves. Downsides to these options include, first and foremost, setting a precedent for changing caps. There are caps in 13 other zone districts, and we have waiting lists in 3 of those zones. There are applicants on those wait lists that have been waiting nearly as long as some of the folks on the RMF wait list. So certainly changing or eliminating caps in RMF could raise equity issues from applicants in other zone districts. Also, by increasing or eliminating caps, we'd increase the number of residential units being used as STRs, and it could be inferred that would mean fewer units that could potentially be used for long-term rentals. We could also find ourselves in a scenario where we start to see increased impacts from short-term rentals like those I mentioned earlier: parking, noise, turnover, et cetera. With all of that said, staff recommends that choice of either option 1 or 2 be accompanied by solicitation of public input prior to making any changes. Choosing either of these options would also need to move forward along a separate timeline from the other topics that we're currently pursuing code amendments for. We also wanted to share recommendations for this topic from our Historic Preservation Commission and the Planning and Zoning Commissions. We have visited with these 2 groups over the last couple of weeks, and frankly, we did not have time to get their recommendations into tonight's memo before it was due. So HPC made a formal recommendation to Council that caps in RMF remain as is and unchanged. And P&Z did not make a formal recommendation on tonight's topic, citing a lack of data, and they requested that Council direct staff to collect information to aid in determining rates of permit utilization.
Thank you for that.
Of course. Finally, our staff recommendation is for option 1, making no changes to current STR policy for the RMF zone district. Staff finds that what is happening in RMF right now is consistent with what Council and the community intended for back in 2022. If we can stay the course without altering any policy, we can reasonably expect that permits are likely to become available in RMF within the next year.
Thank you for that, and thank you for the presentation. We do seem to have a couple of people who are watching and have raised their hands. This is an important topic, and so I will take the public comment on that, but you will need to maintain just about a 3-minute timeline, and I'm going to depend on you to turn on Jason B. if you're ready to speak. Just identify yourself for your record, please. Does he have to turn his microphone off, on?
Yes, he's currently muted on his end.
Okay, you're muted. There you go. Jason. Just give us your name for the record and you can begin speaking.
Hi, this is Jason. Can you hear me?
Yes, quite well.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Basically, what is this guy?
Right.
Jason, what is your comment? Okay. Put him back to unmute for a second. Is that a prank call? Jason, did you have comments on the public here, the issue we're discussing?
Yeah, sorry, that was not fun interrupting.
Please go ahead. Your time is on now.
Okay, so would you be giving this to...
I'm sorry, we're going to
It's because
discontinue.
I load me next to me. I know it.
We're going to cut you off. I'm sorry, Jason, was not a serious call. If you have comments, you can send them in writing, please. Thank you. How about Mr. Aspen? And please identify yourself with your given name for the record, please.
I need to unmute.
And you need to unmute your microphone. Mr. Aspen, you're
We give it to Israel Zionist permits. Israeli permits. World Health Organization criminals.
I'm sorry, you're off topic. We're going to discontinue this. Thank you.
Sounded like the same person.
That's a first.
That is a first. Very good. Now that we've had a laugh. Was that in New Zealand or in Australia?
Hello, I can hear you, please.
Okay.
Of course you can hear us. These are televised meetings. But
Of course I can hear you. I can hear you.
yeah,
I've hacked the systems.
We've removed.
okay. Thank you very much. Audio visual, exciting. So let's have a discussion on our staff recommendations. Staff is very clearly and firmly on option one, seems to believe the program is working as intended. The numbers seem to bear that out. Let's hear from council. John, we'll come down the line.
Yeah, as people might remember, I was part of the council that enacted the STR moratorium. I believe Rachel was part of that council as well. And it was really hard fought. There was a lot of pushback. I believe there was a lawsuit. It was difficult going through that, actually, but I'm glad we did. And it seems like that work is functioning just as we intended with the outcomes we desired. So my vote is to hold course and go with staff recommendation number one.
Christine, if you're ready.
Yep, thanks. Question, with you mentioned properties where the permit was abandoned. Do you have any idea or sense of, just anecdotally, what has happened to some of those?
Yeah, there's a couple elements to that. The way that permits are abandoned per our regulations is if a property sells, the permit doesn't transfer, so the permit becomes abandoned. The owner can obviously stop renting and decide to voluntarily give up their permit. That's another way that they can abandon the permit. They have to renew within our renewal timeframe and deadlines, and if they don't do that, the permit becomes abandoned. Those are the three ways that we've seen permits become abandoned over the whole course of the program. 70% of permits we see become abandoned when they are not renewed by our deadlines. Now, whether that is due to the property selling during the year and the owner just not contacting the city, or same, the owner decides to stop renting throughout the year and they don't contact the city, but then at the end of the year the permit doesn't get renewed, that's kind of what we find. We don't have a way to pinpoint those end of year abandonments, why they're happening.
Got it. So you don't have a sense of if it's gone to long-term or owner occupied after the abandonment?
Right.
Okay, thank you. I think you said it best. You said attrition is happening faster than expansion of the wait list. And for me, that says the program as intended or set up 2 or 3 years ago is working. We'll see what happens in the next year, 2, 3 years. But I would support option one at this point as well for that reason. And I do want to just acknowledge the conversation that Rachel and Bill had about zone overlay. I think it was really healthy and valuable. I'm not sure that I'm wanting to move forward that conversation, but I thought it was important, and thanks for bringing it forward.
I'll go down and skip myself. Even though I'm going down the line, I don't want to weigh in ahead of you, so go ahead.
Okay, sounds good. I just had a couple of questions and then some thoughts. Does anyone know what the units that are waiting are doing right now? Are they sitting empty? Are they being rented to long-term people? Like, do you have any information on that, or?
We do have the data that 6 of those units have long-term rental licenses, and then another 6 have short-term rental licenses.
Because they're residentially owned.
Yes. But aside from that, we don't have data on vacancy.
Yeah, so the 54, very little information on what they're up to, basically, yeah. It'd be nice to know, but not your job to know that, just nice to know. And then you spoke earlier about the different zone districts, and there's only 3 other zone districts with wait lists right now? And that's 3 of, would you say 13, 10?
14 total, RMF being one of them. So we have 4 wait lists.
Okay,
RMF, R6, R15, and R30.
okay. And then the ones that are not on the wait list, are some of them like under the cap and have just slots open?
Yes.
Yeah. So, you know, this is an interesting topic because it was passed by voter approval that the previous council put forward, and it was passed more significantly than not with like 60% voter approval. So I think any changes made by council definitely don't want to seem like we're pulling the rug out from the voters on said things. However, I guess the one logical thing I would turn back to council about as just like a little food for thought is wondering if the caps should be adjusted across the board. And what I mean by that is these zones that are not utilizing it maybe can be shrunken down to a lower cap number, and the zones that are can be raised to a higher cap number. That way, it's still across the board the same amount of STRs that could be used across the city. Because that seems the most logical to me, as far as, even though this was voter approved, it still was somewhat of an experiment. It was the first time we were doing this, regulating short-term rentals. And I feel like the most fair thing to do to all involved potentially would be to lower the cap in some zones and raise it in other zones, and then call it a day, hopefully. But like, that's really where I'm at, as far as if I were to make any changes without feeling like I was pulling the rug out from underneath the voters. That's where I would head towards. And I don't know what to do with that, as far as turning back to other council members and the mayor and Bill and saying, is that something you'd be interested in looking into? Because otherwise it would probably die on the vine. It would just be a lovely thought that I had one day. But that's where I'm at, as far as if I were to make any changes, that's the changes that I would potentially make. And I would love to hear staff make a recommendation on that, whether you feel comfortable pulling from other zones and not pulling the rug out from them, and then raising it in these zones that are on wait lists and still feeling like you're accomplishing everything we set out to accomplish when it came to short-term rentals.
Just a small clarification. The tax code was what was approved by the voters. So the tax structure that supports the code.
Yeah.
But they didn't really vote on the code.
No, but
But they voted on what amount would be charged for the different types of licenses.
No, I guess clarification from my part and where I'm coming from is when I've talked to people about this, and this was even part of like the campaign that I went through a few years back, people were saying, don't mess with the short-term rentals, we're voting on it, that sort of thing. So I'm sensitive.
It's clearly one was a proxy for the other, but
Exactly. That's where
just to be
I'm coming
clear for the
from.
public, they
Yeah.
didn't vote on the code, they voted on the tax structure that supports it.
Yeah, and actually that more goes to the point of if we were to change the code, tweak it a little bit to make it better, and the tax structure remains the same, you're not pulling the rug out from underneath, you're just helping the program function potentially better and still accomplish the same goals.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. That was just wanted to be clear, small.
Yeah.
Okay. Bill?
As I said, I don't see a super strong need to pursue option 2 or 3. I do think that there's some inherent unfairness in the way that we've structured this, and I think I've made myself clear on where that stems from. But I like Sam's idea of some potential reallocation. 25% across the board doesn't mean that that's where it belongs today, and so maybe a reallocation is warranted. I don't know how much of a supply-demand mismatch there is in some of these other zone districts, but I think that'd be interesting to hear from staff on, and I don't see any downside to that. I think that's sort of just reallocating the total number of permits to meet where the demand might be today. And maybe that's something that should happen every 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
So I'd be supportive of exploring that, certainly, and otherwise, I don't think that targeted action just on RMF is warranted to me,
Okay.
in terms of the caps specifically.
You know, on that most recent kind of comment, I'm not particularly interested in it because it's more about the impacts to the neighborhood, to the unique individualized neighborhood where the caps came into play. And to say, well, we're going to go ahead and overload your area because these guys aren't using them enough. And frankly, I don't think the STR code was ever about creating lodging for us. It was more about controlling this kind of new phenomenon of rentals in residentials that were never assessed affordable housing fees the way a commercial property would for the commercial turnover. And it's always been not so much about, oh, it only takes me one housekeeper a week to fix my place up. It's about who serves that guest when they leave the front door of the residence. Who do we have enough employees to see that they have the whole guest experience? And that's whether, you know, it's somebody's plowing the roads or whether we're riding the bus, driving the buses, or serving the food. So to me, it's not about us finding a way to create more utilization of short-term rentals by moving the permits over to another area. But that's just my impression of it. And what particularly is a salient point for me is when you see 33% of the new ownership who's gotten on the wait list, got on that wait list with expectations of investment profit. This is almost speculation that I bet I can buy it now, and there's already a cap, so the seller's not going to ask as much money, and maybe I can get that permit and turn it into a hotel room, you know. So I see it as very much speculative, and I do see the program working as intended. Perhaps better than inspected. I mean, I think a lot of people thought you have STR permit, you hold on to it for your whole life, you know, and you'll find a way to keep using it and, you know, everything like that. But I think the hassles perhaps sometimes of the turnover, you read some stories even locally of people having to disappear in it, pointing experience, having been a host, or their property's not as well taken care of as they wanted to. They find it's got some issues. So I'm willing to strongly support option one. And I think, as Christina said, if we want to revisit it again in the future, but I do not see changing our zoning laws to create more lodging as something that we really need right now, between the traffic congestion and the employee burnout that we're already getting and the shortages. So that's my thoughts on that. I think we have a majority that says you don't have to work on RMF zone for a while longer, and we'll see where we can go from there.
I just
Closing
I just wanted to clarify on something you said, that like the concept I had in my mind was much softer as far as
it's just like
the
a few,
changes.
4 here, 3 more here.
Yeah. Nothing like so extreme that you just overload it, but like honestly, if you did it like Emmy and Ben and whoever looked at it and said, yeah, this would make sense coming from staff, not coming from me and trying to overload anything.
Right. No,
I just want to clarify my thing.
I'm sorry if I didn't mean it to sound that way.
Okay, yeah. Just want to clarify. Thank you.
I always get in trouble when I talk. Okay, Ben?
Please go ahead.
Really quickly, if I may, with that, you can anticipate seeing us back here in just about a month for a first reading of the ordinance for those first 6 topics. We won't be proposing anything for RMF based on this conversation. Throughout October, we'll be doing outreach to our customers and the community and the public about the code amendment proposals. We're shooting for a second reading of the ordinance in late October, and then ideally, we can wrap all these changes up by mid-November when we start our permit renewal period. And some of those changes will take effect for the benefit of our customers at that time.
Thank you. And the one thing I would add as a comment to that, I imagine that most of the short-term rentals are handled by a property management company within town. Maybe there's some individuals who do it or not. But I'd like to make sure that the permit renewal period is well advertised and that nobody doesn't, renew because they missed the notice or they didn't know the deadline. So I just want to make sure that information is very much out there.
Yeah. And you also I have ComDev's commitment that, as we get into the next season, we'll have another year's worth of data. And I think as we, come to understand new things, I think as, if we can come up with some creative thoughts to respond to some of the ideas that Councilmember Guth or Councilmember Rose had on the topic, we'll revisit it with council. But I think the big thing with this program is just making sure that we're, keeping track of data year to year. And I think we've gained a lot of understanding of the program over time.
That's great. Christine?
Did you say we will not be doing the outreach because we're going with option one for the stakeholders? Okay. It seems we're having a discussion about policy at a higher level, but it's really exclusive to basically two properties at this point. We haven't heard I haven't heard their perspective in this conversation, and that might be enough said in that. If there was any outreach, I'd love to hear from, and that's, if you're listening, those two properties, let us know how you feel about this proposal as well.
They have written to us a few times. I think you've received some of the letters from Frias, not in the immediate last week, but over time.
Yeah.
Ben alluded to that.
Yes, I recall that, but more specifically to this. So.
Okay. And the ordinance is going to be the simplifications and processes that make it easier that we all discussed at a prior work session.
Yes.
Okay. So it should be good outreach to the stakeholders and public along those lines. And we'll probably hear more about RMF as well.
Yeah.
It will be the first 6 topics here.
Okay.
Is what will be in the ordinance and that what we'll be doing outreach for.
Folks with their hands raised, we have pretty much closed this topic. We've been discussing it since 4 o'clock. I did try to take some public comment earlier, and it seemed like just practical jokers. So we're closed with this topic, and we will be moving on to water rates now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mark's iPhone seems very sincere.
Pardon?
I'm just kidding.
Oh.
Mr. Williams.
Well, I know. I started thinking they're using those
John.
names like Mr.
John Doe.
Mr. Aspen.
Isn't that Lorenzo Semple?
Right.
Good evening. My name is Erin Laughlin-Malaconi. I'm the Utilities Director. With me here is Ryan Laibach. He's the Deputy Utilities Director. And we're excited to talk to you all today about the Water Fund and the Water Treatment Facilities Improvements Project and some potential paths forward. I will share my screen if you all are ready for that. So we're here tonight, as I mentioned, to talk about the Water Treatment Facility Improvements Project up at the Castle Creek Water Facility. And paths forward, we've identified as staff towards implementing that project through water fund rates and other potential bond measures. We believe this project will provide operators and all city customers and visitors with a fantastic renewed resource for up to another 50 years, and we're excited to discuss with you all the options we've identified and any questions and comments you have on those to identify council's preferred path towards delivering this infrastructure renewal project in line with the 2025 and 2027 council goals, and hopefully deliver a project that can provide the customers and any visitors who consume Aspen Tap with a really great product. Before we go too deep, just wanted to cover the agenda. So we're going to start with a background on the water treatment plant facility, and then jump into the proposed water treatment facility improvements project and the details of what that scope includes and why there's benefits to it. And then the bulk of the presentation is really going to dive into the water fund impacts and the options table that you saw in the memo and for tonight's packet, and dive into some of the pros and cons of each of the options we see, as well as the trade-offs, so we can have a healthy dialogue on questions you have and if there's a council direction on a preferred alternative for staff to further review. Lastly, we'll go over next steps related to 2026 financing and any potential out-year alignment, as well as any bond measure November 2026 requirements. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Ryan Laibach to give some more of the context on the water treatment facility background.
Good evening. Pleasure to be here, and thank you for receiving us to talk about this. Certainly glad to cover it. You've all been up here to our water facility, and it's a quick overview of what's there. Just wanted to refresh you guys on what we have there and the impetus for the project, and give you an update also on the status of the current project as we are working with our consultant team and construction manager at risk team to work on the project aspects. Next slide, please. Here's a rendering of a 3D view of that same concept. One of the top focus areas for the water fund has been this project to look at different look at this facility that last time it was updated was in the 1960s, 1980s. Since that time, regulatory wise, there were treatment goals of 5 NTU produced water. Since that time, we are now at 0.3 NTU is what.
What's an NTU?
Sorry. It's a measurement of turbidity, so how cloudy your water is. Sorry.
Thank you.
So basically, it's a way of looking at what the bacteria would be in your water.
Okay.
The cloudier it is, the more bacteria. So our filters do that business of removing that bacteria. And so those same filters have been in place since the 80s. We're now requiring orders of magnitude more out of those filters. So just wanted to talk about that. And so right now we've got a project where we've hired a Garber, a consultant, and a construction manager firm to help us through these improvements. Next slide, please. So here's the why of the project. As we mentioned, aging infrastructure, the last time that most of this has been looked at was 40 years ago, especially the filters that we mentioned, as part of any routine maintenance at a water facility. Oh, thank you, ma'am. Usually I have a really loud voice. I was
okay.
A little worried. The filtration process, last it was replaced was 15 years ago. That's the media itself. The filter consists of both sand and anthracite to remove those particles. And, part of routine maintenance, those are required to be replaced every 15 to 20 years. Another reason, besides aging infrastructure, is operator safety. We run 2 different treatment chemicals at the plant for both to finish the water quality, and that's bleach in order to safely disinfect the water, and fluoride. There are 2 different feed systems for fluoride and a central bleach facility currently, and we'd like to consolidate those 2 chemical treatment processes, storage and feed processes into their own building. And that would then allow us to have modern safety equipment for operators. That would shorten the length of lines that convey those chemicals to the points in which they're dosed. And we think improve the facility. In addition, the last reason for the project is regulatory pressures. Since we talked a little bit about how over time CDPHE and EPA have changed those regulatory goals, that certainly has affected the pretreatment processes. So if you looked back at those aerial photos, that's the geodesic domes that are there, and then a facility that sits under the admin building. Those are actually not rated for the same flow rate as our filtration process. And so the goal would be to have a facility where the pretreatment facility that we're recommending matches the filtration capacity. In addition, there's been a lot of work at CDPHE to look at the discharge permit that we have, which is what comes out of the backwash pond. As the filter gets dirty, we backwash that filter, and that the solids that are conveyed from that process then are deposited in the backwash pond. As being good stewards and in compliance with that discharge permit, we're looking at expanding our residuals facility to be able to handle all of the residuals that are produced. And that's both that new pretreatment facility, having more capacity for those solids, and then an additional pond to have additional. So we'd have double the capacity of what we have now and ensure water quality that we're sending to Castle Creek. That's where the backwash pond eventually discharges.
Is that pond mucked out periodically? So the solids that have separated are disposed of at the landfill?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
That was all I had. Any other questions about the whys or the project?
No, I think you've made the memo very clear about the need. And I'm just going to take a half minute for my council and say I was in office in the 90s when we started finding out we had some water problems. Particularly the new plant had honeycombed concrete and was not well built, and it was out of warranty. Unfortunately, our operator prior hadn't caught that in time. But we were starting to see a lot of this old filter medium not really catching everything, and the state told us they saw a new microbe they'd never seen before. They couldn't even tell us what it was, but we were in the middle of the summer season, and there was a lot of behind-the-scenes work with our management talking them out of a boil water order. And, we're just the devastating impacts on a resort community of hearing that there's a boil water order where you are. And this is where you just don't let your systems get to that point. You let your systems age into that condition. And so I really appreciate seeing you bring this forward. And it's been a very comprehensive look with professional evaluation outside of our own staff. So I don't think we need to talk more about the need as much as the different financing options.
I appreciate that, Mary Richards. That is a good segue to some of the timeline that will, tie in a bit to the options we presented. So Ryan's put together this project timeline that he's been heavily involved with the designer and the construction manager at risk.
Yeah, so as Aaron pointed out, we're currently in the midst of this project. Just this week, we received our 60% deliverable from Garber, our consultant. We meet Wednesday to go through that as a team. Our construction manager at risk will then take that drawing set and specifications and update their estimated guaranteed maximum price in October. Subsequent packages after that, we've identified long lead items as part of the bare bones of what we need to do at the filtration plant. That's backwash pump replacement, the implementation of an air scour air system that would use a blower to take air as part of and wash the filters as part of the backwash process. and revamp our entire electric and controls system up there. And that includes the motor control centers and some instrumentation and control equipment, as well as filter under drains. We would be coming to you with that for approval in roughly January 26, after the team has put together those specifications and received proposals from the marketplace.
And the funding for that would come from fund balance, since we would not have the bond question to the following November for the rest of the work?
Yes, ma'am. We have that money already budgeted in our 2026 planning.
Thank you.
As the project moves forward into next year, we would have a 90% deliverable, which would be delivered in approximately January of 2026. And then the longer lead time, as you see in that bullet point, between the deliverable of drawings and specifications would allow our construction manager at risk to produce a guaranteed maximum price that would then inform us for the ballot question, and then have a more solid number that we can then start finalizing the plans and follow your recommendations once that was done. Then those, if there was any RFIs, requests for information that came out of that process, then the project team would massage those and have final deliverables by mid-May of 2026. And then, of course, as you mentioned, Mayor Richards, the ballot language approval, we would be then coming before council to get that approved, and then seek bond measure approval in November 2026. Aaron will go over those in a little more detail, but of course then, depending on the, then construction would begin in March and April of 2026.
Thank you.
So this is the same options table that you all saw in your memo, and staff has worked pretty diligently to identify a handful of models that can give council the range of options that all maintain the minimum water fund reserve of 25% of fund balance, while supporting both the water treatment facility improvements project in various levels of scope, and keeping the other capital and operating expenses for the rest of the water utility supported and funded as well. So none of these options only support the water treatment facility. They're looking holistically at keeping the water fund going and maintaining some of those capital expenses we have in our other utility branches in the distribution system, our metering, so that we're not putting anything on hold that would, age dramatically. So the options shown here are primarily to show the range of options that we've identified and get a sense for the trade-offs with each, and have a discussion on the direction council would like us to further pursue as we work between now and the deliverable of final guaranteed maximum price with our consultants, and also to have alignment between the initial direction we get from council today and maybe perhaps later through this year, and any subsequent efforts required by staff, this council or future council and potentially the electorate on supporting out-year water rate fund requirements, because as you'll see here, some of these options are not solely handled with a decision made by this council. It has the out-year impacts that will require a council support, even if this makeup changes. Ryan has mentioned the timeline for further development, and so we want to reiterate that these numbers shown are currently best estimates at the 30% level with our construction manager at risk, and so that in that sense they're subject to change as we get final pricing, and once we get guaranteed maximum pricing, staff will fine-tune any of these numbers here and the effects they have on both rates and potential bond measure requests. These numbers might seem large, however, we'd like to reiterate that the water plant has gotten by with very little maintenance and upgrades since its inception in the 60s and 80s. And, aside from a lot of routine maintenance and sweat equity from operators, a lot like a car, eventually things do need to be replaced, and we are at that point. To help put all of these options into perspective before we dive into the pros and cons, I'd like to state that options 1 and 2, when you compare the 2029 rate change from 2025 to 2029, where our water rates would sit relative to other Colorado municipalities, options 1 and 2 would still put the city of Aspen utility rates in the bottom half of Colorado municipalities. And that's what comparing our 29 projections to 2025 other ratepayers in the state. Options 3 and 4 that have, more dramatic overall rate increases are more in the upper third of the state of Colorado municipal water rates when comparing potential 2029 levels to current 2025 across the state, which overall I think still tells the story that our water rates would remain pretty competitive across the state regardless of the direction by council. And there's just different ways to get there as far as implementing this project and supporting the fund and keeping necessary fund health. So unless there's questions at a high level, we can jump to individual.
I do have some questions that apply to all options. Thanks, Aaron, for the memo and presentation so far. First question is, this bond measure would only be bonded against the revenues for coming into the water department, right?
Correct.
Thank you. Second question is, what dollars do we have reserved in the water department fund, whatever that number is, for this project? And what are we planning to use for it?
Right now, at a high level, since I don't have the numbers right in front of me, I want to say the water fund has approximately $22 million in it that has been saved for this specific project purpose, and that has been in the returned water funds. And the rest, we don't have the delta.
Okay, and do these options and the numbers presented in these options contemplate using all of that 22 million?
Yes.
Understood.
And I just want to point out those capital funds are not in one single year. It's in the course of 3 years, 4 years, something like that as well.
2030, that's correct.
Yeah.
What does that mean, this?
So there's a handful of dollars programmed in 26, 27, 28 for a total of
Long-range budgeted. But
Yeah.
there's
Correct.
22 million sitting in this fund that have been collected historically
Well, that's what's programmed out from a long-range budget perspective.
to collect. So we don't today have 22 million.
Correct.
How much do we have today?
8 is fund balance for
As far as
25.
available to expend for this project, I think it is in the realm of $8 million, and most of that is planned for the long lead equipment procurement for next year.
Okay, and what capital reserves do we have in the water fund that aren't specifically allocated to this project?
25% of operating is what you said earlier.
That's the minimum, and we're actually well above that minimum reserve right now. I think the last time we checked, and I can confirm, and we follow up in a memo, I want to say it's over 100% of reserves is where the fund is sitting right now.
We're at about $31 million in actual fund balance today,
Okay.
of which you have to hold 25% aside of annual operational costs, operation and capital.
Great.
So that gets deducted out of the 31 million, which is, do you know your operating budget number? I don't know it off the top of my head.
Around 12 to 13 million?
12 to 13?
So thank you. That's super helpful to understand. Very healthy. Why did we decide to allocate, as of today, 8 million of the, what'd you say, 31? Pete?
31 right now.
8 of 31 to this project and not more?
Sure, I can answer that. At this point, what we know is from the 30% is carving out that for the long lead time items. So we know we're going to expend that amount in 2026 to cover both that and some additional pipe work to connect it to make our construction schedule a little bit better. So at this moment, that's what we've been directed as a team to put in the budget. But otherwise, the delta would sit in the operating fund. Pete, how would you characterize it? Savings or?
Yeah, we have to.
CapEx reserves.
Yep, reserves, rainy day, in case of emergency. Yeah, so it's the timing of some of the money going out the door versus it all going out starting next year. There'll be some of that out of the 31 million. And just the other capital projects aside from the water treatment plant, we also have some of the money that's sitting in fund balance also being able to handle line breaks and other types of things that are going to happen on the system.
Great. Okay. And would it be irresponsible to allocate more than 8 of the 31 to this project at this time? Or do we think that it's smart to keep, 23 Am I doing that math right? I
So
think that's right. Something along those lines. Like, should we be putting more of this, since we already have that money, should we be putting more of it towards this project? Or do we really need to reserve that money?
So I would say that there's four kind of main components of our water system. There's the raw water collection, there's our treatment process, there's our pumps and tanks, and there's our distribution system. And each of those four components have equal importance in our ability to run a public water system. And so we need to maintain some level of capital to take care of each of those four components. And so we felt like this was the appropriate proportionality to put towards this.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
End of the day, we are programming as much of the reserves that we can, that we feel we can, to push out the door to lower a debt obligation and everything else, and a rate increase.
I mean, we also have to bear in mind the eventual potential of new reservoirs and relocating the Castle Creek and Maroon Creek rights, and that would be an expensive hit, too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would make this project seem inexpensive. All right, I'm good. Thank you for all those explanations.
All right, thank you, Bill. So we'll go one by one. Just as a reminder, option one, as proposed, is, to follow the car analogy, this is you're getting a new car. Your car's reached the end of its life and you're getting a whole new car. This option in particular is having a higher 2026 rate adjustment at 30%. We've shown the anticipated proposed 2026 bond measure at the $85 million, but this would implement full project scope. That's all the wants and the needs and the things that would actually, they're not critically driven by regulatory pressures or safety or aging infrastructure, but they would, streamline processes and improve operations. And so the strengths and challenges staff have identified for this option in particular include that, there's a larger 2026 rate increase, although it's relatively a return to business as usual rate adjustments that are projected for the years after that. So 2027 through, 2030, when this project would theoretically be constructed, would have the rate adjustment in the realm of 5%, which council and the community is pretty familiar with. You get the full project scope implementation. And so there's, you include that proactive regulatory response in a couple of the different process areas. The water rates, as I mentioned briefly, even with the 30% proposed rate hike in 2026, would still remain in the bottom half of Colorado municipalities by 2028 and 2029, based on projections we have right now. Some of the challenges with this are that you would be asking the ratepayer base to pay a significant amount next year compared to what they've been used to seeing for the past 10 years. And so there would be the communication challenge with the customer base and preparing them for that change in 2026. Additionally, we would be asking for a full rate adjustment from this council prior to getting a bond approval. And related to that, some of the required financial components of this are just the rate adjustment and bond approval. And some of the, once it's in the hands of the electorate, there's a little less control in surety and understanding that decision. And so putting the full rate increase ahead of knowing that the bond measure would be approved by the electorate may, in some eyes, be viewed as an over collection of revenue that can't support a project that wouldn't be approved for the debt service. Option two is still doing the full project scope implementation, just kind of smoothing out the curve as far as the rates that would be necessary to implement the different project packages, and the same level of anticipated bond measure. A lot of the similar strengths as to option one, given that the full project scope's implemented, so you are proactively responding to some of those regulatory pressures. A strength here is that you are asking the customer base for a slight increase from what they'd be seeing as a baseline and spreading out that overall increase from 25 to 28 across 3 years instead of going after it harder in one. And again, option two in 2028 and 2029, our projections show that our water rates would still fall in the bottom half compared to other Colorado utilities, so the rates would still be pretty competitive. You might wonder why we have the spread of 3 years shown both as a strength and a weakness, but that's due to the fact that in 3 years, the council makeup will change, and so this council may make a decision and feel good about supporting the project from this direction, but there's no controlling if a different council would support that. So we might get most of the way there, be working on project packages, and then, if a a rate of roughly 10% in the third year is not supported, then the project team would have to re-review the scope that could be implemented at that later date.
Just a question I'll ask now, because we have option 2 up. You know, I looked at that, and you do the 15% and then 10, 10, 10. Is it possible to even that out so it'd be more like 7, 7, 7, 7 over the next 5 years? I mean, I'm just trying to look at that, you know, instead of 10, 10, then dropping down to 5, you know, just to make it a little more of an even number. But it was just another hypothetical. It's not like it makes the cost go away.
We could certainly look at that and see if that smooths the curve. I know some of the projections were run against the current cash flow that we've gotten from the contractor.
Okay.
So it might be that if it was a 7 smooth curve over maybe 4 years, we'd have to massage the cash flow and the different packages of when they're delivered. But
Yeah,
it's certainly
it's just a hypothetical.
an option that we could pursue.
Thanks.
And similarly, this measure does still require the partnered passage of the bond measure in November of 2026 to allow the rate increases partnered with the bond to deliver the full project implementation. Option 3 is a different take on how to deliver this project. It differs from the first 2 options presented because it's focusing on the critical item scope, and that critical scope would be the filters primarily, and operator safety. And then, you know, we still have those other scope needs, but they're being pushed out into later years. Since you're focusing on the critical scope only, the anticipated financing needed to deliver the project is reduced at the outset, but it does have a rather aggressive rate adjustment.
And no bonding.
So yes, this could be considered like a full cash option. So this option is wholly supported by water fund revenues and thereby pretty aggressive rate measures to support the revenue to deliver the project. So there is the strength that there's no bond required. There's no financing with a loan. You won't have to go to the electorate to pass a bond for this, and you do have lower initial upfront project costs. Some of the challenges are that you're asking the community to pay 40% more in 2026, as well as, you know, 25% increase projected in 27 and an 8% increase in 2028 to allow for the delivery of just the critical scope items, knowing that we eventually will have to get after those other items that can't be ignored. You know, we're still going to be planning as a department to eventually respond to the items that will need to be answered for regulatory pressure. Which results in some larger long-term project costs due to pushing some of those packages farther out when there's some inflationary pressures and losing efficiency in construction and sequencing. It should be noted that option 3 is the second largest overall rate increase when you're looking at the jump from 2025 to 2029 of the 4 options presented. Options 1 and 2 are the lowest overall rate increase in a 4-year period. The final option we have for you all to consider and discuss tonight is a bond, including a bond measure for delivering critical scope items and pushing the remaining scope into out years. And so it has a bit of a softened rate adjustment because the bond measure can spread the debt service out over a longer period than just funding through revenue collected through ratepayer measures. So again, similar to measure option 3, it does not require as high of an upfront project cost. So there's a decreased initial project cost there. There's also a shorter duration of debt repayment schedule possible, since we'd only need a measure of, currently we're saying on the order of $32 million compared to $85 million. And the challenge again is that there's a much larger 2026 rate increase, as well as the projected rates that we've shown in your options for 27 through 2029. Option 4 has the highest overall rate increase from 2025 to 2029. It's a roughly 83% projected increase with the project construction costs we have now to deliver that. Still require the external bond measure to get a passing vote, and it also pushes some of the proactive response to regulatory pressures into out years, resulting in an overall larger full project cost.
Just observations. both of these second options may require a future council to go out for a bond vote, even if it's a second bond vote on this option or one on the other. So, it's kind of take your bath now or take it later in terms of getting voter approval for these things. The other observation is really just looking at the totality of the rate increases when you go all the way out to 2031. And option 2 comes in at about a 50% rate increase over that 6-year period, whereas others are, option 1 is 55%, and the others are going up from there quite significantly, even though you're not getting the full project done. So are you anticipating like a 20-year bond or a 30-year bond?
In the preliminary conversations that we've had with the finance department, we'd be looking at a 30-year or a 40-year bond to really spread those costs.
And the useful life of the improvements you're making would match along with that?
They would likely exceed it, I think, from the water plant age.
Yeah.
Would you agree, Ryan? The more than 50
Well,
year.
I'll just close by saying this is always painful choices. No one wants to be in the elected seat when rates have to go up. I think it's very important to really be able to justify them entirely. And in some level, this is a result of not having regular rate increases, because it's always something that, oh, we're not raising your rates this year, and we're not raising them next year, but the cost of the equipment and not building up better reserves kind of comes in to bite you a few years later. And so I think that's what we're seeing. Anyhow, I'll turn it over to my board and see if there's comments or further questions on any of these funding options. So why don't you put those back up?
The 4 summary table?
Yeah.
Okay.
And thanks for taking us through the pros and cons.
Okay.
You want to go, Sam?
Sure. This seems very simple to me between these choices. Option 2, and then with the same consideration that Rachel said of trying to even out the rate increases over time.
Yeah, if those first 10 years can be 7s, and then the 29, 30 can be 7. I don't know if it'll work. As you said, there's a lot that goes into the background of it, but coming right off the 15 to see it a little lower would be good.
Yeah, I guess I'll add the comment that I would expect this bond measure to pass given the criticalness of this infrastructure. I don't think anyone would be like, no, we don't want good water services. That'd be, yeah.
Yeah, very good.
Super supportive of this. And Rachel, I disagree with one thing you said prior, which is that nobody wants to be in the seat asking for these rate increases. I'm actually proud to advance this project because when I toured this facility, I thought I was stepping back into like a 1960s sci-fi movie or something. Frankly, I was ashamed of the fact that Aspen has something that hasn't been updated and meeting modern standards. You do an incredible job given the equipment that you have. It's insane that we still have this equipment. So I'm so excited and happy to support this and advance this and bring this facility to a modern age and hopefully something that does last longer than 30 or 40 years. And I hope that we plan for replacement before we desperately need replacement in 30, 40, 50 years from now. I also like option 2. I'm sort of agnostic whether it's 10 dropping down to 5 or 7 spread across, but option 2 definitely makes the most sense to me. Thank you for presenting all these different options. I think it's a broad spectrum of different approaches, but I like option 2. I think let's get it done with and get this thing up and running. Thanks.
Very good. This end of the table? John?
Yeah, first I just wanted to say thanks. It was a super entertaining memo to read just because of the water treatment facility acronym. I chuckled all the way through it. I really think this is great work. One of our council goals is resiliency, and this is a huge part of Aspen being resilient. As I recall, our current rates are below almost every community down valley too, so that makes me feel okay about raising rates, but I concur with the rest of council so far that option 2 is for me the best path forward. And I'd also like to, while we're doing this, if we can be as ready as we can for some type of wildfire calamity like Glenwood's been through. I know their water treatment.
Switching water sources and things like that.
Just their whole water system was fouled for, I think, several weeks because of that fire. And if we can, whatever we can do to be prepared for that type of situation, I think would be great. Thanks.
Christine?
Thanks. For the public and for the newspaper that's here, what does a 15% increase look like for the average customer?
That's a great question. So a typical residential customer in the gravity zone, which is about 80% of the system, would see an $11 increase approximately next year from 2025 to 2026 on their monthly bill.
The price of a coffee in Aspen. So, I'm in support of option 2 as well, and agree with everything that's been set up here. So thank you.
All right, and I like option 2 as well, and just kind of keep looking at the numbers for us. If you come up with other better options you want us to consider in the future, smaller bonding package, larger bonding package, or something like that, I know for all of us right now, the question is what will materials cost? It's getting very hard to estimate because of the tariff issues and the changing nature of that. So keep us informed, and when we go through the fall budget season, I think being able to present a little more of the numbers, such as the question Christine just asked, what would that do to an average person whose water use is X and someone whose water use is Y? And so we can kind of finalize that and have that locked in. And I think to Bill's, well, actually to both people's points here, we can't control what a future council will do, but they will have a bond that's passed to support. And so I think it's something we need to show kind of in the 5-year projections of the future budgets, that revenue. And if it doesn't come to pass, then we will make a new budget. But that's that. Okay, I think, is that, do you need any further direction on this?
No, I think that's fantastic. We appreciate all of your time, and I think we're equally excited to, work with council and the community to deliver what I think is a really exciting infrastructure renewal project. So we're really happy to have this support.
And for the record, I'm as proud as Bill is. But that was a really good comment, Bill. I think you're right about that. It is something to be proud of, that you're taking care of your business. It's not passing it along. Pete, do you have any other items for us or anything to bring up?
Not for
No?
tonight.
We'll just see each other at 5 o'clock tomorrow night. Okay?
Yes, we will.
Thank you, Grassroots. We appreciate your service. Thank you, everyone on the board. When are you going again to Portugal?